Hey guys, this is the painting we're going to work on today. So this is my finished piece, and I'll just show you my reference photo here. I took this off of a free photo stock website, so feel free to do what you like with it. Paint it, sell your painting, anything you want to do with this photo is fine. And that's my messy palette. I only used one palette today. That's pretty good. I had a backup just in case, but I was able to use the one. So that's the finished piece. I think it turned out pretty good. Happy with that. Not too much mess made over here. All right. I'll see you in a bit. Hello and welcome to an acrylic paint along with me, Carrie. So I've got a 12 by 12 canvas here. I'm using two brushes for this painting. I'll be using a small and a large brush. So I have a small round and a larger filbert, which is just a rounded tip here. But any brushes that you have at home in similar size will be just fine. I've got my palette of colors here. So I always use white and my primaries, yellow, red, blue. And I'm going to show you how to mix everything today. I've got some water in a glass to clean my brush and some paper towel just off to the side, which I use to pad out the brush, just to get all the extra color out. Okay, so for my first step, I'm going to refer to little brush as Baby Bear and big brush as Mama Bear. So I'm going to start with Baby Bear brush, and I'm going to mix a purple. Now, purple is red and blue. I'm going to take 1 scoop of each and just put it into an empty spot on your palette. I don't worry too much about cleaning my brush at this point. In between scoops, I'm just going to give that a good swirl. And we're just looking for a nice dark purple. This is going to be our sketch. So you don't have to worry about the colors at this point. Just going to be our nice loose sketch. And we're going to be painting a landscape today, which is one of my favorite subject matters. I always like to start with the horizon line in a landscape. And in this case, our horizon line is about 2/3 of the way. So if we break up our canvas into thirds, roughly, it's going to be about this high. Now I'll first draw a straight line lightly. And then I'll get into a little bit more of the detail of the actual horizon line, because what we've got here is kind of rolling fields. So I want to show these fields. They're not straight, they're kind of bumpy, but this is just a nice guideline for me to keep it straight. So my fields actually go kind of like, I'll draw the major lines in first. So there's one big line that goes down here, and it's on a slight angle. This one's pretty much straight. We don't want them to be really straight, because in the landscape nothing is really straight except roads sometimes. So a little bit of a curve is just fine. Now I've got another hill in the back here, and it swoops down a little bit here. And then one of the hills comes up here. Now I'm working from a reference photo, but you can change this however you like to. If your hill goes up higher, that's completely fine. It's just as long as you like it. That's all that matters. Now I've got some trees in here, so I'll draw the outline of them and then I'll fill them in. They kind of bump up with the other hills here in the distance. I try to get all my shadows in at this stage too. Okay. Now there's some shadow lines in our hills, so I'll draw those in too. You can also use a little bit of water in your brush and just mix it into the paint to allow it to spread a little bit easier for you. Okay, then I have some flowers that are kind of in the foreground here. So I'm just going to quickly outline those guys. And this is really loose, so you can put them wherever you like them. There's a few bits of grass in here as well. And then I have some lines in my hills, kind of gives us a little bit of perspective. And sometimes you get these little squares in the fields where there's two different tones of color, depending on what they're growing. And I also have a few little trees that mark the fields where they start and stop. Okay. And then with my sky, I also like to show a little bit of what's happening up there. So I've got some clouds up here. Again, keep it loose. And I don't have a lot of paint on my brush right now, which is actually working out really well. So I can just press as hard as I need to get the color, the light color here. Maybe a little bit of water. I also have a lot of dark shadows on the grass here in the front, so I'm going to put that in too. It's easier to create your tonal range at the beginning rather than having to do it at the end. Acrylic paints are typically pretty transparent. So if I go in there and it's a green field, so if I go in there with green, it's going to be pretty transparent, and I'm going to have to add a lot to darken it up. So this way I'm starting with a dark tone already, and I'll add my green on top of this. I'm going to switch to the bigger brush. I'm just going to mix a little bit more purple. Okay. I always like to use as big of a brush as possible. Keeps you from getting too detailed and keeps it loose. Now I want to fade it a little bit here. I'll use a bit of water to do that. And just lighten up the pressure as you go to the top. And this is just what I call an underpainting. So you don't have to worry about it. It should be nice and loose and carefree. It's not our final layer, so we don't need to get too worried about it. So what I'm doing now, you'll hear this pouncing noise every once in a while. It's me just pouncing the brush to the bottom of the cup. That allows me to get most of my paint out. And then I'll just dab it on the paper towel. That is kind of an important step, because if you don't clean the brushes well in between colors, your colors are going to get muddy and mixed up and just not be as bright as you want them to be. So every time I switch colors, I try to clean my brush out really well. Okay, so that's basically our underpainting. Then the next step is what I call color blocking. So that's where we start to layer in colors. We're not really concerned about highlights and shadows at this point. We're just getting our colors in. So my field is green and yellow. My sky is kind of gray and blue. I've got some darker greens in here and a little bit of pink in the flowers. And I'll probably use the Mama Bear brush for most of this. So I think I'll start with my sky, and I want to create a blue and a gray for this. There's actually a lot of colors in clouds, and it takes a little while to start to see them. But when we can introduce more colors into things like the clouds and really everywhere, into the green grass, you know, it's not just green, there's little bits of orange and yellow in there. In the sky, I might see, you know, some of that green reflecting up there. Maybe there's some pink in there to draw to my flowers. Those are the kind of fun things you can do as an artist once you start getting comfortable with seeing those kind of colors and playing with what's on your palette in your picture. So I'll make a blue. So I'm just going to take straight blue. I need to lighten it up because it's not that dark. So I want to take some white as well. It's a pretty light blue. The other thing I like to do to make the colors a little bit more rich, instead of just sticking with that combination there, which is a nice blue, I like to tint it a little bit with another color. So instead of just blue and white, I might add a little yellow, maybe some red. Let's go with yellow. And that just makes a richer color. It's not so primary, not so basic. Okay. It ends up being a bit of a teal color, which is kind of cool. I like that color. So I'm going to put that in a few spots up here. Another tip I have for artists starting out, or really any artist, is instead of holding your brush like a pen, like you would write, pick it up. So pretend it's on the table, pick it up like this and hold it like that. You'll find you get a lot more of a broader stroke, a looser stroke. You're using your whole arm this way instead of just your wrist this way. So every once in a while, if I want to loosen it up, I'll just switch up my grip on my brush. And this is a great time to do it. The sky is really loose and very gestural, and I got lots of little movement lines in here that I want to show. And I want to be a little looser with this. When you're working on fine detail, it's a little bit easier to use your grip like this because you have more control over it. So for instance, in these little details in here, but for the sky, I'm going to loosen it up here. And again, don't worry about going over top of layers. We're going to be doing a series of layers to build this up. So I'm going over top of my trees in the background here. That's okay. Sometimes it actually works to your favor to sort of blend things out. Biggest thing is not to be apprehensive of too much when you're painting. You want to just go for it. Have fun. If you're afraid, you won't try new things, and that's how we discover new things. Just letting things happen on the canvas. The best things I've ever discovered were kind of by accident. So keep an open mind. Okay, that's a pretty good color in there. Now I want to create a gray color. So I'll clean out my brush. I always like to start when I'm mixing a color with the biggest color that's in that color. So I know for gray I'm going to use lots of white. I'll put it over here. I know it's going to take a little bit of all the colors, so I'll take just a tip of blue. Blue is a very strong color when mixing. Always go in very carefully with your blue because it will dominate the colors pretty quickly. So I'm taking about equal portions of blue, red, and yellow with a lot of white. And we just stir it up and see what we get. It's a nice color. It's a little bit on the yellow side, but I do like it. So I'm going to take a good chunk of that out so I can use some of that. But I do want it to be more blue. So I'll add a little bit more blue. And a little bit more red. See, if it's too yellow, think about how you can combat that. So if it's very yellow, I'm just going to go to the other colors, which at this point are just blue and red. When you start to mix with the primary colors, it actually really simplifies everything because you can tell immediately what needs to be added. Instead of starting with a huge palette of colors and not really learning, how to do it because it's too complicated to figure out. That's a nice gray. I like that. Okay, so this gray is going to be in my clouds. So I'm just going to brush it in. Typically on the bottom of the clouds, they're going to have the shadow, but not always. Sometimes there's little divots here and there. And there's a few clouds down here too. I try not to paint anything really as a solid flat thing. I find it just adds more interest to create more organic shapes. That is a common thing for, I think, a lot of beginner artists when they start out to just want to fill a whole section and feel accomplished. So just paint your whole sky one blue color, which is fine, and it's, a technique some people do, but I find personally it's a bit of a waste of time for me because then I'm still having to go in and figure out where those shapes are. So if I do it at the beginning, it's a little bit easier for me. It might be hard for you to see at the beginning where your colors are supposed to go, but it will come with time. Okay, now there's some white in my clouds. So what I might do, another little trick that I like to do, is use the colors I have and just add some white to create a lighter shade. It's a great way to be efficient with your paint and not have to remix a whole bunch of colors. I'm looking for pretty much a white color, but it's nice to have it tinted with some of that gray that we had because it'll work really well. And this is going to be my cloud here. Again, I'll change my grip. And you'll see how if you're working quickly, you can work with these wet paints and they'll start to mix right on the canvas, which is another nice thing if you're working quick enough to do that. You'll also notice my painting style has a lot of kind of similar to pointillism, sort of stops and starts. I like to say like a dashed line. I don't really like to do anything solid, like a solid line across. I'd rather break it up with starts and stops because it allows the eye to find all these neat little nooks and crannies to go into. And in my opinion, just makes a more interesting painting. So I love little dots here everywhere. Just creates a little bit of interest. I like how that's blending there. Okay, that's pretty good for now. We may go back and touch it up as we progress, but I'll leave that for now. That's a pretty good sky. So we'll go down to, I think I'll start with my trees in the background here. Now, sometimes I get asked by my students where to start on the painting. And there's really, like, there are rules, but I try not to get too bogged down in the rules because they can really be overbearing and really kind of stifle your creativity. So sometimes I honestly just paint the most interesting thing first because I know that's going to grab my attention. I do like to paint the sky a lot of the times first in my landscapes because it's kind of this natural progression of working backwards to forwards. So in that sense, I'd work all the way from the top down to the bottom. So my next step would be here and then in here, here, till I got to the foreground, and these would be the last, the flowers would be the last part to pop out. But I've learned through years of painting that rules are not necessarily all that good. And so really, it's whatever you want to paint first. Whatever gets you excited and keeps you excited through the whole process. So if you're nervous about one area, maybe don't paint it first. Maybe go to the areas that you're more comfortable with. This piece, I think I may just do top to bottom, but we'll see how we go. It also depends on the colors you've mixed and what you have. So a lot of times I'll try to use what's on my palette. So if I mix this green and I can use it here and here and here, I'll do that. So it's a little bit more efficient that way. So I know I need, I'm going to have a little bit of a faded area in here where it's quite far away. And that's going to be a little bit less saturated. And then I have some trees here that are a little bit brighter because they're closer to us. So I'll work on that and then I'll show you how to fade colors into the background. So for these colors, I need a rich, dark green. And it's got lots of red in it. So that's another trick with greens I'll show you. So I'm going to start with green, blue. And it is quite a dark green. So I took a generous scoop of blue and then I'll take a generous scoop of yellow. Give that a mix. Now again, it's a nice green, but it's very vibrant. So what I always like to do with greens is add some red to tone it down and make it look a little bit more natural. So that red is going to make it a bit more of an army green color. So I'll take a small scoop of that. And that's just something you get used to by doing it. how much you'll need. But generally, if you start small, that's probably best, and then just keep adding till it looks right. And that takes time too to see what looks right. But sometimes what I do is I take a little swatch and I just brush it on my canvas to see if I like it. And that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go for that. I'm going to fill in most of this area here. It's got a little bit of bumps at the top where you can see the tops of the trees. Now, I can put them in, but I don't want to be too carried away with details. So I think I'll decide not to put that in. And that's the beautiful thing with painting. As you go along, you can change your mind, and it's okay. Now this color is also down here. Another tip with this brush in particular, if you have a very large brush like this, which is going to have a skinny side as long as it's a filbert, not a round brush, in order to get different widths, you can apply it this way or you can apply it this way. So if I have a skinny line in here, for instance, these guys, I don't have to switch to my little brush. I just change the direction I'm painting my brush. So you really don't need to go crazy with getting a whole bunch of brushes, especially if you're just starting out. Try a couple different shapes and see what you like. Some people like the square brushes that are a little bit more straight. I'm kind of in between. I like them all. I like the rounded filbert edge, which is this one here. I also like some angled brushes every once in a while. They're fun to work with. But whatever you have and whatever you're comfortable with. Just making sure I get the edge of the canvas here that kind of wraps around the sides. Might use some water in my brush just to fade that green here. It gets faded at the top. And not to worry about these marks here, we'll paint over those. Okay, now I'll go into these areas here as well. These little lines that mark the fields. Okay, now I think it's time to do another shade of green. So again, being conscious of my paint and efficiency, I'm going to use what I have left in here and just mix in some yellow. I want a lighter shade, so I'm just going to go straight in with some yellow. If you don't have any left, just start again. So it'd be a small amount of blue with a large amount of yellow. That's a nice looking color. There's still some red in there from when I previously mixed it, so I think that'll work. So that'll be good for filling in these white spots here. And I don't get too worried about brush strokes at this point. Acrylic paints, like I said, are very thin, so they'll require a few coats. So I'm not going to worry about, I don't even worry about it being smooth and you know, overly blended anyways, but definitely not at this stage. And actually, I really like the brush strokes in there. It's kind of my style, so a little bit more on the impressionistic side. And to be quite honest, it's a lot easier than making something super, you know, super smooth, super blended out, hyperrealism. That is an extremely challenging thing to do. And it's just not my preferred style. Okay, so we're doing pretty good with just getting our basic colors in here. I'm really liking the way this is showing this gradation from dark to light. Now I will probably touch on these flowers before we get too far along. So let me just clean my brush out. Now this is an area you can put any color in here that you like. Flowers can be any color you want. As an artist, you're the one deciding what you do. My reference photo has these kind of pink flowers, which I'm really digging, so I'm going to do that. So again, just using the bigger brush here, I'll take some red and some white. Don't want to get my white too dirty, so I'm just kind of being careful of cleaning it. Now, that is going to give me a super bright pink, kind of Barbie pink color, which is fine. But as you'll get to learn with me, I don't really like to do just one mix. If I can make my colors a little richer and a little bit more character or what have you, I'll do that. So I'm going to scoop in a little yellow, maybe not that much, but it's just going to make that pink a little softer, a little bit more like a coral, and you'll see your paintings improve rapidly when you just start to add little bits of other colors. Just it turns it from, you know, a primary kind of looking painting to something a little bit more exciting. So these are really loose flowers. I'm just kind of going over the outline that I did. Okay. Now this is actually a good time to look at your canvas and see, is there anything else that has this color in it? I see a little bit of this color in the grass and in the fields below here or above here. So I'm going to throw some of this in there. And this is a great way to balance out your painting. So instead of it just being blue, green, pink, I want to have lots of these colors mixing around. I might throw some pink up in the sky. Why not? It's going to make it feel all kind of cohesive by doing this. Some of my lines can be pink. And you'll start to see different colors a lot better. There's a little bit in here. The other interesting thing is how you brush your strokes in here. So I like to always brush with what I'm doing. So clouds are nice and billowy, fields are swooping, and also like to go with the shape of whatever I'm painting. So usually with landscapes, it's horizontal. If I'm doing a building, it would be vertical. My flowers are billowy too, so they're kind of cloud shaped. But that helps give your painting shape and a bit of volume. Also just, it sort of tricks our brain into thinking it's real because that's what we see in real life. There's a few little highlights in these trees, which is kind of nice, and this color seems to be working well to pull those out, so I may as well use it while I have it. It's just hitting every once in a while, sort of like the sun is peeking through at certain spots, but it can't get all of them. And I noticed just looking at this that this piece is quite dark, and I don't want it to be a solid line, so I'm going to just break it up a little bit here. Okay. Coming along. So as I kind of go through the process, I sort of look at my reference photo and see what is it lacking, what's my painting need, and I see a lot of light yellows in the grass that I need to put in. So I'm going to work on those next. Okay, so I'm going to start with a fresh color, so I'll take some yellow and I want a small bit of a hint of green, but not very much. So if you have some left of the color we just made, use that. If you don't, just go in very gently to your blue and just a tiny bit of blue in there. Blue is very, very strong. So you can easily, that tends to be when I get people that have trouble mixing colors, it's usually just a bit of a heavy hand with the blue. And you can't really combat it other than going in super heavy with everything else. So a lot of times it's better just to start over if it's not going the way you want it to, which is kind of frustrating and it feels like you've wasted a lot of paint, but you'll waste more trying to fix it. So okay, the other thing with my, the paints that I'm using here and most acrylic paints, most beginner, student quality acrylic paints are very transparent. The white is the only opaque color. So you'll notice if I go and brush this on here anywhere, it's very transparent. It's not going to cover very well, which is okay if that's what I'm going for. But if I want it to show up and be bright, I have to add a little bit of white. So I'm going to do that. Now I've got a fun pop of green here. Okay, that's a nice looking color. And the light green is just going to go on parts of these hills here. I want to keep a little bit of that dark line there, so I don't want to totally erase it. So keeping in mind, again, the lines that we paint, these fields have lines that go this way and this way, but a lot of them are going this way. So I just want to brush with the direction. Then I also have some of this bright green in this more foreground area of grass. And this grass is a little bit more vertical, but you do have to be careful with doing too much vertical. I'll see how it goes, but it can look a little choppy. So our job as artists is to simplify everything for the viewer. So I try not to get too worried about showing every little detail. And I can start to overlap this line over here, which will make this part feel like it's in front of this dark shadowed area. Now I feel like I can go a little bit looser and freer down here. I tend to do that with my foregrounds. Usually my focus is somewhere in the middle. It might be in these flowers here, but I think what the highlight for me is these rolling fields and these greens and kind of exciting bits in here. So I think that's where I'm going to spend my time, highlighting that area. There's some strong pieces of grass that you can see here. And if you don't feel comfortable using the big brush, you can use the small brush. It's completely up to you. Okay, now there's another color in here. It's a little bit more of a yellow orange. So I'm just going to take some yellow and some red and add it to that existing color. Actually, I might just use some of this pink. Let's see how that goes on. Pretty good. A little bit transparent, which I thought it might be. So I'll do a few bits here and there, and then I'm going to add some white to make it pop a little bit more. Sometimes it helps to even blur your eyes a little bit or squint, and then you can see overall shapes and colors a little bit better. Just simplifies everything. Because that really, at the end of the day, is what we're doing. We're editing from a reference photo or your imagination and just try and create something that's easy on the viewer. Okay, that's coming along. I might actually switch to the baby bear brush. In my paint night classes, I usually have 3 brushes. I have a big one that's called Papa Bear, and then I have my medium and small one, so Mama Bear, Baby Bear. But I'm trying to show you that you don't need to have so many brushes. And especially if we're working on a smaller format like 12 by 12, you really can get away with just a couple brushes. So don't feel like we're ignoring the papas out there. We're just simplifying things here. Okay, so I do need to work on the flowers and add a little bit more into the fields and maybe some fun colors in the skies. And also these guys back here. I like to talk it through, kind of helps me think about my approach and what I'm going to get to. But usually I'll start with the thing that needs the most amount of work. So I think it's these flowers right now. They need a bit of attention, a bit of love. So let's show them some love. So I've got a nice pink color in here. I need a bit of a highlight, maybe some shadow. So I'll start with the dark color because I've got some of that mixed here. I'm using the baby bear brush because they're a little smaller. There's a little bit of a shadow, and also they're going to have a stem in here. So I might just indicate a small stem. And a little shadow in each one. And again, this is something I like to do. When I see a color in different spots in the painting, I'm going to use it. So I'm going to use this dark purple just to pop out these lines in the fields a little bit more. And even just to make these dark areas a little darker. I'll even go back here too. So again, you'll notice I'm brushing vertically because my trees are growing that way. It's these little things that actually really do make a big difference. And I'm just going into the dark areas and popping that up a little bit. It's a lot darker down here too. Down here in the grasses, I can kind of do some fun little lines, sort of grass-like shapes here. It's pretty good. Might bring a couple more up here. And again, there's rules like, you should work dark to light, but like I said, sometimes rules get in the way. So, I'm already working light, but I'm adding some darks in here because I feel that it's more important to show some of these shadows. So I'm going to do that. What I will do is go over that dark a little bit more with a lighter version. So because I have this color mixed already, I'm actually going to do that now. So I've got the purple here, but I do want to lighten it up a touch just to give a highlight to the shadowed areas. Now if I just go in straight with white, it's going to be quite blue. So that's nice, but it's still very vibrant. Now that'll work for the shadows up here. So you know what? I'll use that in my foreground. Even my flowers have a little bit of this bright blue color in them. And I'm just going to throw a little bit of it in the grass because I think it's kind of a fun color. It's a great shadow color. Just adds some interest to the painting. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit into these dark areas in here as well. And back here too. Typically shadows have a blue tone to them, blue or purple tone. Okay, now because we're getting close to this background color here, I'll show you what I want to do there. So when I want to fade something into the background, it typically gets less saturated. So how do we do that? Well, we add some white, and then we also want to dull the color down. So we add the opposite color. So I've got basically a blue color here. And so the opposite color would be an orange on the color wheel. So I'll just pick anything, even a yellow, red. And that's going to desaturate it. So it's not going to be as blue. And also it kind of grays it out, which is good for making it fall into the background and into the distance, which is what's happening with a few of these trees, they're so far away that they're just kind of disappearing here. Okay. And then I might just add a little bit of white to that color, just a touch here. I tend to like to have a couple shades on everything. I just find it makes it a little bit more interesting. Now the background stuff is really something you don't want to spend too much time fussing over because it's the background. And so our eye doesn't want to go there. It wants to go into these exciting places here. It wants to see it in the peripheral, but it's not the main attraction. So the looser you can do the background, the better. Okay, now we'll get back to our flower, which we started with. Okay, so I need a lighter color and maybe a couple more shades. So I'll take my red and some yellow and some white. Now that's looking pretty similar to what I have, so I'm just going to add some more white. That's pretty good. Now in this piece it's a little hard to see where the light source is coming. Usually it's pretty clear, but obviously it's coming from above, but which direction? We kind of need to figure that out in order to figure out highlights and shadows. Now I can see highlights on the top here, shadows here, shadows over here. So I suspect it's kind of an evening piece, not quite evening, but getting close because there's long shadows along here. So this is probably coming from behind. So from our side of the painting, because there's a shadow back here of this hill. So keeping in mind that, then I can figure out, okay, so my sun's coming from this angle, my flowers are going to be lit from this side too. Don't need to get too concerned with it, but it's just something good to think about as you're painting. I always like to have little loose dots around pieces. This is kind of a bit of an impressionistic style, but I just like the way it breaks it up and it's not just one little clump of a flower here. Now again, this is a really nice color and I see a little bit of it over here. So I'm going to dabble it in wherever I see it might work out well. Even in the grasses a little bit. Okay, now there's a little bit more of an orange color happening in our field, so I'm just going to take the pink that I have and add some more yellow and red to it. And again, this is a nice color, but it's a bit bright for what I want to do. So I will add a touch of blue, just a little small amount. So it's not as bright and doesn't take away from some of my other highlights in here. Now I might even use this color in the sky. Just see what happens when we do this. It can be a little scary sometimes to go in with what seems like a really bright color, but it's usually very rewarding when you take those risks. And what I'm going to do now, because it is a little bright, is just calm it down a bit. I'm just going to take some white, mix it into this off-white color that I had. If you don't have anything on hand, just take some white, tiny bit of yellow, and a tiny bit of blue. Okay. Soften up that color a little. Maybe I want a little bit more blue in there, so I'll take a tiny bit of blue. Kind of think of the cloud shape too. It's like billowy. Nice and soft. I still feel like it might be a little strong, that pink color. So maybe I'll take some of this gray. And I notice I'm tightening up a little, so I'm going to change my grip. Okay, and then I just want to bump it up again with some of the light color. And I'll probably switch to the Mama Bear brush because I want to keep it as loose as possible. So I just have basically white, and I'll just pop out the highlights of the cloud. As the clouds get a little closer to the horizon, they tend to be flatter. So I'll show a little bit more of a swoop there. And anything you want to soften up at this point, you can just kind of go over with a little bit of white or pop out. And again, kind of squint or blur your eyes a little bit, and it'll help you see the overall shapes better. Now sometimes you can work backwards, so I'm kind of cutting out the negative space in these trees here, just to show a little bit more detail. Clouds are quite fun. You can really get a lot of expression out in clouds. I think that's good for now. I don't want to go too detailed in these guys. It's going to start to take away from what's going on down here. So I think I'll leave it at that. That's a hard thing to do, is when to say stop, because you can just keep going and going. So now I'm just scanning my overall picture, looking for any spots that I want to address. I do feel like there's a little bit more green that I could put in here for the field, a little bit more richer. So just building up the layers again. So I think I'll mix some more green. So yellow and just a smidge, like the tiniest little bit of blue, because I want it to be fairly light green. And then some white so that it's gonna be opaque and stand out. Okay. Yeah, that's nice. Every step you add of a layer just makes it that much better. Now I'm going to do a little bit more white. And this will kind of be my last layer, I think. So I'm just going to dance around the canvas with this light color till I feel it's sufficient. There's a little bit of it down here. There's a little bit of a golden orangey color in here, which is really nice. So let me take some yellow and some red. Not too much red. And a little white so it stands out. It's pretty good. And yeah, that's just down here. It's kind of like the golden hour. So when the sun's setting, everything gets a little golden. That's actually a really nice color there. I see that over here. So that was just orange and yellow and some white. And you just go until you feel like you're happy with your piece. Maybe one more yellow. Yellow and a white. And a touch of this orange. This is kind of where the magic happens when you get working real fast. Things come really intuitively in your painting. Oops, got a little bit of water on that guy. That's okay. Now it's starting to feel alive to me. Okay, just gonna dabble this in a little bit. Here and there. Might switch to the baby bear just to get a bit closer detail. Finer detail. Okay, I feel like this is pretty good. I could carry on, but I think you gotta know when to stop. That is the hardest part. Because you start getting into a groove and you're feeling really good. And then, you know, you go too far and you're like, uh-oh, what happened there? I lost it. So I'm feeling good. I should probably stop now. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed that, a little landscape painting. And I'll see you next time.